The concept of the shadow, though unsettling, had burrowed itself into Alara's mind. She couldn't shake it. She began to see her own relentless pursuit of goodness as a desperate attempt to avoid any hint of those forbidden traits. One afternoon, Silas brought out 2 small, hand-carved masks. One was bright, serene, almost angelic. The other was grotesque, with exaggerated, almost predatory features. Most people, he explained, holding up the serene mask, only show this face to the world. They only want to see this face in themselves. It's what they believe makes them acceptable, loved. He then picked up the darker mask. But this other face, the shadow, it doesn't just disappear. Sometimes, we see it in others, even when it's really our own denied part being reflected back to us. It's called projection. Alara was confused. You mean? I see my own anger in someone else, even if they aren't angry? Precisely. Or, more subtly, when you deny your own assertive strength, you might struggle to see it in others, or worse, you might project a naive trust onto people who don't deserve it. You assume everyone acts with the same goodness you strive for, because you refuse to acknowledge the capacity for anything else within yourself. He continued, his voice low and insightful. Your kindness, Alara, can act as a mirror. For some, it reflects their own capacity for warmth, and they welcome it. But for others, those who have built an armor of cynicism, those who have repressed their own ability to trust or be generous without expectation, your authenticity becomes a threat. It exposes their own inability to give without calculation. Instead of welcoming that awareness, they reject it with indifference or contempt. Their disdain has nothing to do with you, it's about their own deepest insecurities and self-sabotage. Alara's mind reeled. Leo. Anya. Was it possible? Leo's casual disregard, Anya's cutting remark, was it not just about them being bad people, but about her kindness triggering something uncomfortable in them? Leo, who projected an image of great artistic vision but relied on others to do the actual work, might have been projecting his own denial of responsibility onto her, seeing her generosity as a resource, not a gift. Anya, who couldn't seem to stand on her own, might have been projecting her own fear of independence onto Alara's willingness to endlessly prop her up. The idea was revolutionary, painful, and strangely liberating all at once. It shifted the locus of blame, not from her to them, but from her being inherently flawed to a dynamic she was caught in. It wasn't that she was too kind and therefore inherently weak. It was that her kindness, unbalanced by an awareness of her own protective instincts, left her vulnerable to those who were operating from their own unintegrated shadows. Armed with these unsettling new insights, Alara started to re-examine her past. It was like sifting through old photographs, but with a new pair of glasses. The details were the same, but the meaning had subtly shifted. She remembered the countless times she'd said yes when her gut screamed no, the long hours spent working on a project that wasn't hers, feeling her energy drain away, yet silencing the small voice that urged her to stop. She'd always dismissed that voice as selfish, as unhelpful. Now, she wondered if it was her own repressed need for self-preservation, her own healthy boundary trying to surface. She recalled the sting of resentment when someone took credit for her work, or when her efforts were overlooked. Before, she'd felt only shame for feeling such an unkind emotion. Now, she saw that resentment as a possible manifestation of suppressed anger, a natural, protective response to injustice that she'd never allowed herself to feel, let alone express. She realized that her own fear of conflict, her deep-seated need to be liked, had prevented her from asserting herself. The memory of Anya's hurtful words, "Some friend you are," still stung, but now Alara saw it differently. She hadn't been a bad friend, she'd been a person trying, for the first time, to protect herself, and Anya's reaction was a desperate attempt to maintain the dynamic of Alara's unlimited availability. Anya was projecting her own inability to be self-sufficient, her own fear of facing life without a constant crutch, onto Alara's newfound boundary. This wasn't about blaming herself, it was about understanding the interplay. The pain she felt was not a result of her kindness, but a consequence of her unconscious kindness, her inability to integrate the parts of her psyche that could protect that very kindness. The shadow wasn't something evil to be purged, but a vital, powerful part of her that had been exiled. And its absence had left her vulnerable. The journey was just beginning, and it was terrifying. To acknowledge these parts of herself, the assertive, the boundary-setting, even the selfish need for self-care, felt like a betrayal of everything she believed she was. But the alternative, the suffocating pain of her unchecked kindness, was no longer sustainable. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor of hope began to stir within her, a new kind of strength budding in the fertile ground of her newfound awareness. The journey of acknowledging her own shadow was not a gentle unfolding, it was a brutal, self-excavating process. Alara would sit in Silas's studio, surrounded by his enigmatic art, the silence occasionally punctuated by his soft, profound observations. She'd spend hours alone in her own space, replaying conversations, dissecting feelings she'd meticulously buried. The most uncomfortable truth to unearth was her anger. It wasn't the explosive, destructive anger she'd always feared. It was a simmering resentment, a slow burn of indignation at being taken for granted, at being used. She saw it now in the tight knot in her stomach when Leo had dismissed her efforts, in the sharp intake of breath when Anya had accused her of being a bad friend. This anger, Silas gently explained, wasn't evil, it was a signal. It was her deeper self crying out, "This isn't fair. This isn't right." Protect yourself, but admitting she felt anger, even a quiet, justified anger, felt like a betrayal of her entire identity as a good person. Good people didn't get angry. Good people were patient, forgiving, endlessly understanding. To embrace this facet of herself felt like inviting a monster into her meticulously curated inner garden. Silas, sensing her struggle, had offered another metaphor. Imagine a river, Alara. It flows, it nurtures, it sustains. But if it never has banks, if it never asserts its own course, it becomes a flood. It drowns itself, and everything around it. Its strength is in its defined banks, not in its boundless, uncontained spread. He gestured to a piece of driftwood, smoothed by years of battering waves. The Vno is not a wall to separate yourself from the world, but a bank to define your own flow. It allows your energy to nourish, rather than dissipate. It's an act of self-preservation, not selfishness. The word selfishness still made her flinch. She'd always seen it as the antithesis of kindness. But Silas challenged this too. If you are so empty, so drained from constantly giving without replenishing, what true good can you offer? Is it not selfish to deny yourself the rest, the space, the nourishment you need, simply so you can be perpetually available? The realization hit her with surprising force. Her endless availability hadn't made her a better person, it had made her an unsustainable one. It had turned her kindness into a burden, not just for herself, but inadvertently for those who learned to rely on her without ever learning self-sufficiency. Her fear of being disliked, of being seen as not kind enough, had kept her trapped in a cycle of giving that left her hollow. The true act of courage, she realized, wasn't in always saying yes, but in finding the strength to say no when it mattered. It was a slow, painful process of internal shifts. She started journaling, not just about what happened, but about how she truly felt about it, allowing the uncomfortable emotions to surface. She allowed herself to feel the sharp edge of resentment, the weariness, even the flicker of disdain for those who took advantage. And as she acknowledged these feelings, surprisingly, they began to lose some of their suffocating power. They were no longer hidden monsters, but acknowledged facets of her complex self. The first tangible steps of integrating her shadow were tentative, almost agonizing. Ilara started small. A local charity asked her to volunteer for an all-day weekend event, something she'd always jumped at. This time, she paused. She felt the familiar urge to say yes, the fear of disappointing them. But then she pictured Silas's river, she remembered the exhaustion from the mural, she took a deep breath and sent an email, "Thank you so much for thinking of me. Unfortunately, I won't be able to commit to the full day this weekend, as I need to prioritize some personal time. I'm happy to help for a few hours if that's still useful, but I need to decline the full commitment." Her finger hovered over the send button, heart hammering. It felt like an act of rebellion. What if they thought she was selfish? What if they stopped asking her for help altogether? But she sent it. The reply came quickly, "No problem at all, Ilara. We completely understand. A few hours would be a huge help if you're still able to offer that. Thanks so much for even considering." Relief washed over her, a wave so profound it almost brought tears to her eyes. It was a tiny victory, but monumental. The world hadn't ended. She hadn't been condemned. Next, she began to address the subtle boundary infringements. A colleague, habitually late, asked Ilara to cover for her early morning class again. Ilara felt the familiar automatic yes rising to her lips. But she caught it. "I can't this morning, Sarah," Ilara said, her voice firmer than she expected. "I have my own preparations. You'll need to find someone else or make sure you're on time." Sarah looked surprised, even a little miffed. "Oh. Okay, well, good to know you're not always the go-to person anymore, I guess." She walked away, a slight huff in her step. Ilara's stomach twisted. The old Ilara would have chased after her, apologizing, explaining, trying to smooth things over. But this new, nascent Ilara simply stood her ground. Sarah's reaction was exactly what Silas had warned her about, resistance to a challenged social norm. It wasn't about Ilara being mean, it was about Sarah being confronted with the fact that her behavior had consequences. It was uncomfortable, but it was also clarifying. She started building tiny walls around her time, her energy. She set specific hours for studio calls and stuck to them. She politely declined requests for favors that would overextend her. Each no was a quiet affirmation of her own needs, a small victory in the arduous process of self-reclamation. It was terrifying, and some relationships undoubtedly shifted, but a new kind of respect, quiet and unwavering, began to emerge from the ashes of her old, boundless availability. The biggest hurdles were still Leo and Anya. Ilara knew, deep down, that she couldn't fully heal without addressing the source of her deepest recent hurts. It wasn't about retribution, but about closure, about reclaiming her narrative. The opportunity with Leo came unexpectedly. A local art gallery, impressed by the mural, invited him to give a talk on community art projects. Leo, in his usual fashion, tried to rope Ilara into preparing his presentation slides and coordinating the event, casually mentioning, "You're just so good at all that detail stuff, Ilara." The old Ilara would have cringed, felt the familiar surge of resentment, and then done it anyway. But not anymore. She met him for coffee, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. "Leo," she began, her voice steady, "I'm happy for your success with the mural. It was a project that meant a lot to me, and I put a significant amount of my time and energy into it." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "However, I need to be clear. I won't be preparing your presentation or coordinating this event for you. My work on the mural, and the lack of proper acknowledgement for it, taught me that I need to protect my own contributions and energy. Leo's charming smile faltered. Elara, come on. It was a team effort. And I did mention you. He sounded almost indignant, as if she were being unreasonable. A brief mention as a dedicated volunteer hardly reflects the months of work I put in, Leo, Elara stated, her voice even, devoid of accusation, simply stating facts. I'm sure you can find someone else to help you. My focus is on my own studio now. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, perhaps a touch of anger, but also, surprisingly, a hint of something she hadn't seen before, respect. It was a grudging respect, but it was there. He tried a few more manipulative tactics, but Elara held firm, calm but unyielding. Eventually, he sighed, shrugged, and muttered something about finding someone else. Elara left the coffee shop feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and exhaustion. She had faced her fear, and survived. She hadn't needed to lash out, she had simply stated her truth and held her boundary. Anya was harder. Her calls still came, though less frequently since Elara started letting them go to voicemail more often. Elara knew she couldn't cut Anya off completely, there was too much history. But she couldn't continue being Anya's sole emotional crutch either. One evening, Anya called, spiraling into another crisis, demanding Elara drop everything and listen. Elara listened for a few minutes, acknowledging Anya's feelings. Then, gently but firmly, she interjected. Anya, I hear how distressed you are, and I care about you. But I can't be your only support system. I need you to understand that I have my own limits, and I can't always be available to listen for hours. Have you considered talking to a professional, or joining a support group? I can help you find some resources, but I can't fix this for you. Silence. Then, a raw, hurt voice, so, you're just giving up on me? After everything? The old Elara would have crumbled. The old Elara would have rushed to reassure Anya, to retract her words. But Elara held firm. No, Anya. I'm not giving up on you. I'm taking care of myself. And in doing so, I'm actually showing you the respect of believing you are capable of finding strength within yourself, and finding other healthy supports. My love for you doesn't mean I have to sacrifice myself. The conversation ended with a click. Anya hung up. Elara felt a deep ache, a sadness for the possible loss of a friendship, but also a profound sense of self-respect. It was painful, but it was honest. She had chosen her own well-being, not out of malice, but out of necessity. As weeks turned into months, Elara's life began to transform. The constant ache in her chest receded, replaced by a quiet strength. The resentment that had poisoned her interactions slowly dissipated, because she was no longer allowing situations to fester. Her relationships, particularly those that mattered, began to deepen. True friends, those who valued her for who she was, not just for what she could give, remained. They appreciated her new clarity, her newfound ability to say no without guilt. They learned to respect her boundaries, and in turn, their interactions became more balanced, more genuinely reciprocal. She found joy in their shared moments, unburdened by unspoken obligations. Art for all, Elara's leadership became more effective. She delegated tasks more assertively, setting clear expectations. Surprisingly, the studio thrived. Volunteers, once perhaps unconsciously reliant on Elara's endless capacity, stepped up more, taking ownership of their roles. They respected her more, now that she respected her own time and energy. Her kindness wasn't gone, it was simply more discerning, more intentional. It was no longer a default setting, but a conscious choice, offered from a place of genuine abundance rather than depletion. She found a renewed passion for her own art, her sketchbook filling with designs that reflected her journey, abstract shapes of light and shadow, rivers with strong banks, figures standing tall and resolute. Her creativity, once stifled by exhaustion and obligation, flowed freely again. Ilara also learned to recognize the subtle cues of potential exploitation in others. She no longer rushed in blindly, assuming the best. Instead, she observed. She listened not just to words, but to intentions. She could discern between genuine need and calculated manipulation. This discernment wasn't cynicism, it was wisdom. It was her integrated shadow, the part of her that could see deception, that could assess risk, working in harmony with her inherent empathy. One rainy afternoon, Ilara sat with Silas in his studio, sipping hot tea. She had come to rely on their quiet conversations, his insights a steadying hand on her turbulent journey. "You look lighter, Ilara," he observed, his eyes twinkling. "I feel it," she confessed, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "It's been hard, Silas. So hard to look at those parts of myself, to change how I interact with people." "The most valuable things always are," he replied. "You haven't lost your kindness. You've simply found its anchors. You've integrated your shadow, child. You've brought those disowned parts, the no, the anger, the self-preservation, into the light of your consciousness. They are no longer operating from the darkness, sabotaging your efforts. They are now allies, guardians of your light." He picked up a small, perfectly balanced stone sculpture. Wholeness, Ilara, isn't about being perfectly good or light. It's about being truly whole. It's about acknowledging that both the light and the shadow are essential aspects of who you are. Your kindness, without the strength of your boundaries, was fragile. Now, it is resilient. It is rooted. It is a genuine choice, born from abundance, not fear or obligation. Ilara thought of the pain she had endured, the confusion, the deep sense of betrayal. It had been a crucible, melting away the naive layers of her unchecked kindness, forging something stronger, truer. She was no longer just kind, she was resiliently kind. Her empathy was sharper, her compassion more potent, because it was given from a place of self-respect and discernment. She could give without losing herself, love without being drained, and help without being exploited. She realized that true kindness wasn't about infinite availability or endless sacrifice. It was about offering her unique gifts and energy with awareness, with boundaries, and with the deep understanding that her own well-being was a prerequisite for her ability to truly help others. The shadow, once a terrifying concept, was now a vital part of her inner strength, a silent guardian of her open heart. The changes in Ilara were palpable to anyone who knew her. Her presence was calmer, more grounded. She radiated a quiet confidence that was far more impactful than her previous effusive charm. She still offered help, still listened with empathy, but now, there was a knowing in her eyes, a discernment in her actions. She started incorporating some of her insights into her art classes, subtly, through metaphors and discussions about balance, about the importance of negative space, about contrast creating depth. She saw some of her students, particularly the older ones, begin to understand, to apply these artistic principles to their own lives. One day, Mrs. Henderson, the sweet-faced pastel artist, lingered after class. "Ilara," she said, her voice softer than usual, "you've changed. You're still so kind, but stronger. More grounded. It's beautiful to see." Ilara smiled, a genuine, full smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I suppose I'm learning to be kinder to myself, too. It makes all the difference." Elara continued to visit Silas. Their conversations deepened, exploring further layers of Jungian thought, but always grounded in the practicalities of human experience. She understood now that shadow integration wasn't a destination, but a continuous journey. There would always be new situations, new challenges, new parts of herself to discover and embrace. But she now had the tools, the awareness, and the inner strength to navigate them. Her story wasn't one of bitterness or a retreat from the world. It was a testament to the fact that true kindness thrives not in the absence of the shadow, but in its conscious integration. It was a beacon, showing that one could remain open-hearted without being foolish, empathetic without being exploited, and loving without being lost. Elara, the kind person who once got hurt, had become the resilient woman who understood the profound power of her whole self, light and shadow dancing in harmonious balance, guiding her forward with strength and grace. The unseen costs of an open heart had become the most valuable lessons she would ever learn.